Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Civil Dialogue, the show where we discuss history, theology, politics, the arts, and more. Most importantly, we try to maintain open minds and civil behavior as we proceed with our discussion. Once again, I am your host, the Creative Nerd, coming to you live from Manchester, Maryland tonight. Now, one quick update before we continue. This episode is being pre-recorded on June 26th for scheduling concerns. So by the time this is uploaded, it will be July 7th, in keeping with the two-week, now it's getting out of my mind. But anyways, the 2-week schedule for this. But anyways, our guest tonight is coming to us live from Richland, Washington, one Miss Janie Barbosa. Ma'am, glad to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so without further ado, let us get underway. So to start things off with for our audience, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Janie Barbosa. I am a curriculum writer and teacher, specifically in the language arts and English. I've taught middle school and high school English, mostly high school now, AP levels of AP courses for 20 years now. And there are few things that I enjoy more. In fact, I would be very torn to decide whether I loved words more or working with people. But in the end, I would choose working with young people because then I get both words and people. Why that is, I love words. They're so incredibly powerful. And the reason that I love the age group of high schoolers and even as young as middle schoolers is just because of their energy and their desire to harness that energy into doing something that matters. They're at the prime moment in life to have that door to words and their power opened to them. So my hope and my prayer and my intent in teaching is to show them precisely and concretely how careful thinking, accurate rhetorical analysis, or critical listening or reading of others' works, and just in general precise language, how that equips them to more clearly, powerfully, and confidently pursue those things that they're called to do. So I guess that's probably enough about me, but I just love words and relationship and youth.
Quite an ambitious mission there. Okay, so moving on, what do you value most in life?
Hands down, relationship. And I use that term generally, but also specifically. So firstly, I value my relationship with God because through that and from that flows every other relationship that I enjoy. So husband, children, family, friends, even perfect strangers on the street. I just really value relationship. And that ties into, again, my love of words, because words are what allow us to relate to one another, to relate one idea to another, and just to draw connections and make connections in life. So, for instance, the words that we use set the tone of our relationships, and that's literal and figurative. And so I would say relationship is what I value most.
Quite a decent virtue to value in this day and age.
It's been challenged lately, hasn't it?
We may talk about that later, but for now, name one quality which will make our world better.
Right relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And I'll explain that a bit more I consider that a quality, to seek after right relationship with God, because as I said in my last question, once we get that sorted out, as we learn who we are in Him, as we learn who we were made to be, who we were made, or what we were made to do, all of those things that happen through relationship with God, then everything else falls into its proper place. Every other relationship becomes more healthy and happy. And in fact, Jesus concisely tells us what is most important to pursue when the Pharisees challenge him to name the most important law. He says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." So I like that he sneaks two in there, but they're so related that he does that and it works. And it just shows that right relationship with God redeems every other relationship, our relationship with other people. So to do the will of God is firstly to love Him, and out of that flows a love for others that is genuine and complete and true. And so if we would all just be willing to submit our own desires and will to God's, this world would be so beautifully loving. So you could say that right relationship, I'm just going to, so that I give it a clear term or as a quality, I will label that submission and obedience to God.
Okay, quite an interesting way to think about things. Now, on the flip side of that coin, what is one characteristic which is problematic in our world today?
The way we hate submission and obedience, not just to God, but even to the idea of God. To lately, we've seen the idea of authority and the challenge that we're living in currently shows that we just don't like those words. I'm thinking of Les Miserables, the play, the stage play, and I love the scene where I don't remember his name. It's the college student that's leading Marius into he's trying to get him to join the rebel cause. And
The
his
revolution.
words are, yes, his words are so persuasive when he is singing about that. Every man will be a king. That's what we kind of all really want. We want to be the king, but what we find when we submit to a right king, God, is that leads to our freedom, but that goes contrary to our logical human reasoning, because I think there has been so much legitimate abuse by humans in authority. Anyone reading history, I think, could agree with one another that no human is perfect, so they make bad authorities over other humans. They always make mistakes. They always cause abuse, whether accidental or intentional. And that is a barrier. The abuse is created or caused in history by humans in positions of authority, causes us to throw out the goodness of submission when we should submit, and obedience when it is good for us to be obedient. Am I making sense there? I hope so, but
yeah, you're making very good sense.
okay.
And quite a different way to think about things from nowadays.
Yeah, it's a challenge because, again, it does not feel right to us, and history seems to prove authority wrong, but it just proves to me that no man deserves my 100% submission all the time, but I can trust a good and perfect God. And when I submit to His will, my life is increasingly like Him, good and perfect. Increasingly like it. It's not there yet.
Okay. Well, for the sake of time, if you could have dinner with one famous person, dead or alive, who would that be? That could be a famous author, politician, theologian, celebrity, whoever it is, as long as they are famous. Just one, though.
Do they still stink? No. I have to admit, I don't have a strong desire to have dinner with dead people. But I know what you mean. And I'd like most to hear from God in this line of thinking that I've gone on. So that happens through his word and the Holy Spirit. So if I had to choose a person, you can see that's a real challenge for me, but I guess I'd go with the Apostle John, because his books in the New Testament really challenge me. And I mean, Revelation, who wouldn't want to talk to the author of Revelation for just a half an hour? I don't think dinner would be long enough to get all of my questions out, but it would certainly prove interesting.
Quite the unusual choice. All right, so now it is time to move on to the topic. The role of the media in either enhancing or destabilizing civil dialogue. So first, and this is a little bit about you, since you happen to study in or to specialize in literary study, what attracted you to the field in the first place?
I would have to admit also that I wasn't attracted to my field of study as a young person. I just kind of fell into it. Things fell together. And actually, I went into teaching in the first place out of obedience and submission to my parents. Well, they suggested that for me because they saw potential there. When I was young, I had no clue what I wanted to do. I think I would have liked to be Peter Pan if that was an option. But I went into teaching, and as I met other teachers, that just inspired me to love teaching in general. And then I had a couple really amazing English teachers who opened English up to me, because English was kind of boring, especially like the grammar pieces and the precise things. I didn't naturally like those, but when they began to open those up to me and show they really just empowered my thinking, I got very excited about what I teach. So I just fell into it, I guess.
You just stumbled upon it and it grew on you from there?
Yep.
All right. So here's an interesting one. When it comes to literary criticism, in this question, this can include cinematic and artistic criticism. What are some critical aspects to look for in good quality content?
This question is so hard for a writing teacher. I could spend years on it, and I know we don't have years. So in one word, I would tell viewers to look for control. Control would be the one word that I choose. And that's because if an author's words are not carefully controlled, they're dangerously loaded with, at best, untested ideas. It's not just what an author communicates that tells us what they really intend or mean. It's how they communicate those ideas. And for example, a writer or speaker, or even a fictional piece like a movie, but I'm going to separate that because I want to talk first about literal messages before I go into fictional. That's a whole nother ball of wax. But a writer or speaker may claim to hate racism, but if their overall work actually elevates it, that's a problem. And I've read things that do that. An author may claim to promote diversity, but actually undermine it. Excuse me. By the whole of what they say. So the details of a piece matter only within the context of that piece. They can throw in a great couple of phrases that sound really good and really right, but if they are not connected intimately and innately with the whole piece as a whole, the author doesn't actually mean what they're saying. And so control is evidenced by measuring each detail to the whole. And by whole, I keep saying that word, I'm referring to the author's theme or main claim. And so one of the things that complicates this is kind of a bullet point under control, is objectionable content. And I wanted to discuss it today because well-meaning people that I talk to often rule out works that contain objectionable content. But if that objectionable content is controlled to deliver truth, it is valuable. Conversely, other, especially viewers of entertainment, such as movies, since you brought those up, they will indiscriminately revel in objectionable content that serves no controlled purpose. I've heard modern authors, popular authors today, say things like, I wrote it to challenge literary stereotypes. That's not a real purpose. Anybody can do that just by writing opposite of what everyone else has written in history. And in my experience, that leads to objectionable content. So if the details linger on ugly things and objectionable content for no controlled purpose, that's a problem, and it's a signal that the author isn't controlling what they say. They're just like that. Objectionable content or challenging stereotypes can sound fun at first because it may be new to us, but to wrap that all up, I would just say, begin to think of your entertainment, whether it's written or on the movie screen, whether it's fictional or fact. Begin to think of what you're taking in via the written word, or, as you said, movies. Think of that as you do your food. The most nutritious food doesn't always taste good, like greens. It's the same for literature and ideas. Conversely, junk food that tastes delicious will kill us slowly over time. So entertainment and literature is the exact same thing as food. We want to get nutritious food, even if it's hard.
So observe content that uplifts rather than degrades. Is that the point you're trying to make?
Yes, and is specifically controlled. If there's content that is not serving a clearly controlled theme or purpose, it's really not. That's a red flag, I would say. So yes.
Good pointers there. Now, what concerns regarding literary and cinematic content would be necessary for creators to account for as they write or direct their stories?
This is another huge, wonderful question. I think that the most concise answer here is to build on my previous points about control. So does all content, that one random scene of the guy popping out in the side view, maybe in say a movie, does it empower their overall point? Does it do something to add engagement or meaning? Have you as the viewer, reader, or has the author, do you think, even considered an overall point? Much of the entertainment that I see today, I think they consider entertainment as the point itself, and that is a shame, I think. It doesn't cause our art to be elevated to the same level of classics, in my opinion. But most writers that I've talked to today with that mentality of a more modern, entertainment geared purpose don't like to consider theme and feel that it kind of hinders their creative ability or doesn't allow them to explore where the plot or the characters organically take them. And they have fair points. Certainly when you're thinking primarily about theme, your first writing as you're growing in your mature writing skills is going to elevate that too high, higher than the artistry even. But as you will keep practicing that, your craft will become more and more subtle, your storyline will become more and more realistic, and you will also be fueling this beautiful, compelling theme that your readers are going to connect with, and that's going to endure through the years. That ability to naturally develop a true theme is what ensures a classic. It is what makes movies stand the test of time, books stand the test of time. Humans watch that and they relate to that truth and they're drawn to it. So thinking about theme when you start is hard, and it may not be the most fun exercise in writing, but it is so powerful, and it will transform writing. So writing whatever pops into your head might sound like fun, but it doesn't result in the best results. So I would say that it is the responsibility of authors to remember that their words will lead to action in their readers' or viewers' lives, because even entertainment is not free from consequences. And that'll lead us kind of into this civil discussion topic.
Quite the interesting direction this is going. Now, just very quickly, does authorial intent matter?
Absolutely. Um, as I mentioned, someone who is writing just to entertain is not necessarily filtering their thoughts. Um, as humans who don't like submission to the will of God, we're naturally uh, we do naturally tend toward junk food, right? And anything that resembles that in the literary world. So, um, you know what sells. We all know what sells, right? We turn on the TV, and advertisers know what sells, and the images all over our world are flooded with that. We can look at magazine covers and TV commercials and YouTube videos and covers and see immediately what sells. And they don't tend to be ideas like love, courage, honor, righteousness. It tends to be cheap attraction. So, an author who hasn't thoughtfully controlled their intent or even considered their content is problematic. Conversely, an author who is concerned with their intent and their intent is one of love, one of honoring their reader, one of elevating theirs while they entertain them, that's going to be your best bet.
All right, quite a well answered question there. Now, what concerns? Oh, whoops! I already answered. I already asked that. So, briefly and concisely describe the ideal work of literature and what that would look like.
Oh my goodness, this one was so hard and yet so much fun. Because the Bible provides the perfect example. I mean, I can't top that. I don't think anybody can. So I'll walk you through my reasons for selecting that book a little bit, and hopefully it's more creative than it sounds. It might sound like a cop-out for me to say the Bible, but it's true. So in relationship to why, the Bible doesn't just tell a good story. It doesn't just tell a relatable story or even an enduring story like a classic. It tells the story of why we as a human race and as individuals relate to any other stories. It is the human experience, and it shows why we relate to each other too. So it tells the story, the true story of our origin, our purpose, and our destiny. And it communicates what's happening in that story on two distinct levels. They're distinctly separate, but they are unified, absolutely unified. And that would be the physical realm and the spiritual world. So the Bible is this tightly woven story of two realms and how they interweave together to speak meaning into our lives. So in this way, it does more, far more than any other literary work I know of. It accomplishes this through the experiences. So the stories in there are about people, and the voices, it's written by different people of real, fully human characters and narrators. And it shows us exactly how they relate to their creator while introducing readers to a knowable creator God who desires relationship with them. As for plot, it shows the dilemma that challenges the relationship between God and humankind, which is kind of a big deal. the growing fracture that begins in the garden out of a genuine desire to be like God instead of that desire to obey God and enjoy perfect living conditions. So we had perfect living conditions, but we just didn't like the submission part. It then develops the unfathomable complexities that prevent humans from being able to fix the situation they accidentally created. It reveals the true antagonist, a malevolent spiritual being who tricks humans into thinking that they can be happier without God. And this addresses current cultural and individual issues that plague us. But it also sets up exciting and unsettling realization that we're not alone in the universe. Rather, we share it with powerful entities that may work invisibly to thwart us and also sometimes be seen or experienced in frightening ways. That's like something right out of the most intense fantasy novel you've ever read, and it's there in the Bible. It also shows humankind's need for a savior redeemer and records their misplaced trust in themselves, or worse, when they trust those malevolent spiritual beings that are aiming to trick them. It reveals that the Creator God desires to and is able to protect individuals from worldly threats and otherworldly ones. It paints a vivid portrait of a promised eternal existence free from strife in ways that both inspire our imagination as readers and teach us the specifics of how we can actually achieve right relationship with this God that wants relationship with us. So to tie all of this together, the plot of the Bible reads like fiction and fantasy, and yet it applies like nonfiction and instruction. And it answers our deepest questions about why we're here, while it honors that truth that's inside of us that says we were made for something beyond what we see right now. And it does so by calling us into an experience that feels like fantasy, but is bigger than ourselves. It's even bigger than ourselves collectively as a human race. And that really appeals, I think, to all people if they'll give that a chance. And basically, I think it reads like the most fantastic, almost unbelievable fantasy book ever written. And so the moral lessons that come out of that far extend beyond entertainment, but they lead us into the ability to actually experience through right relationship with God the things that the book talks about. So the reality of the truths that it conveys. And I don't know of any other books that do that. And that ties into author intent. And again, I'll say that it makes all the difference in a piece of writing, especially a story, and especially one as huge and overarching as the Bible. Because all the claims that the Bible makes depend upon and evidence the goodness of the author. And if the Bible is not what it claims to be, an inspired story of redemption given by God to humankind, then it is the cruelest message ever delivered, because it just paints how we can't do it ourselves and we need this relationship. If that weren't true, then it was a very cruel joke. So this need to consider author intent explains why everyone who honestly faces the Bible's message must choose one of two extreme responses. There's no middle ground or lukewarm response. You read that carefully and thoughtfully, and if you're really engaged as you read, it will either lead you to full acceptance of what's in those pages or full rejection of not just what's in the pages, but the intent and the author. And so readers either choose to trust the goodness of God, the author, or to despise what they believe is an unfair reality that's presented by this impossible to please God. So reader reaction depends completely upon their impression of author intent. And that's where analysis comes in. Accurate analysis helps you
Yeah,
more rightly.
We are down to the
Okay,
last 5
thank
minutes,
you.
so go on ahead and finish that, and
Okay,
we'll go to closing.
okay. So accurate analysis helps you make sure you actually understand what the author did intend. So that's a big deal when talking about scripture.
Okay, so to close this out, concisely explain how literary criticism or literary analysis can help our society be more discerning of the world around us, like facts of life, virtues and vices, the human spirit. And as a side question, how can such an understanding help in bolstering civil dialogue in today's world?
Um, I'm trying to get away from my primary culminating purpose there and to focus more specifically on the specific topic of your question.
Okay.
So I would say that analysis and criticism are merely tools for civil discussion. But as tools, they can be used for good or for ill. And when they're wielded by someone with malicious intent, they will be used, they will produce ill, they will produce sickness, they will produce disrespect, hatred, and those will eventually lead to action. Conversely, when we will commit ourselves to speaking only truth in love, that an analytical thinking and critical thinking help us to spot lies in the words of others and to dispel them with our own words for the sake of others who listen to us. So they are the backbone of civil dialogue if used rightly, but they will tear it down if used wrongly.
Wow, quite a masterfully answered series of questions there. And all I have to say is thank you for being a part of this program, and good wishes to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button and comment down below to leave your inputs as to the discussion at hand. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for future updates on the channel's developments. On the next episode of Civil Dialogue, we will have Michael Panzarotto as our guest, as we will be discussing a different form of art and how it can closely teach us how to better execute or even destroy civil dialogue in the form of acting. It's going to be a great one for you. But until then, I am the creative nerd, and you have been watching Civil Dialogue. Good night, everybody.